Before I turn it over to our Vice President, Dr. Ryan Fraser, I'd like to open us in a moment of prayer. Divine love, thank you for the blessing of being with one another in this format. Thank you for the opportunity to learn from our speakers tonight. Pray that you would calm and center our energies, clear our minds, that we may focus and be open to what you have for us this evening. Pray that you would calm any nerves of our speakers and bless their preparations. Thank you for each person in attendance. I thank you for your spirit among us. Amen.
Amen. I am working around to spotlight folks, so welcome from me as well. I've been looking forward to this for several months, and I have the privilege of introducing Mason to us this evening. I've known Mason for a long time. He's a former student of mine, but he's becoming my teacher, and I'm enjoying learning from him. But Mason has earned a Bachelor of Science in Bible and a Master of Arts in Pastoral Care and Counseling, and a Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Freed-Hardeman University. He's currently a PhD student in counseling and supervision at Tennessee Tech, and works with the College Hills Church of Christ, some of the young adult ministry there in Lebanon. He formerly served as a counselor for the Harpeth Hills Counseling Center, but recently moved over to the Mount Juliet Counseling Center with Mount Juliet Church of Christ. He holds the temporary LPC-MHSP designation in Tennessee as a national certified counselor, board certified Christian counselor. But more important than all that, he is married to Savannah, been married for 6.5 years, and they have a precious little boy, Everest. And Mason's going to be teaching us about, giving us a brief overview this evening of attachment theory and connecting that to attachment to God. And so I'm looking very forward to this. Mason, do you have a PowerPoint that you need to pull up?
So yes, I do.
Okay. Let me find a way to give you, I'm going to make you co-host with me.
Okay.
And I'm going to spotlight you as well. There we go.
Oh, great.
And I just, before you start, just as far as etiquette, if you wouldn't mind everyone else just muting your microphone, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Let's see. Can everybody see that? Is it big and clear? Great. Okay, so attachment theory and attachment to God. So this has been a topic that I kind of stumbled upon in August of last year. Well, no, about 1.5 years ago. I started my PhD program at Tennessee Tech, and we were trying to think about topics that might be really interesting to us, looking forward to the dissertation phase of our education. And I was throwing out, I'm really interested in spirituality with my background in ministry and Bible and pastoral counseling. And so I really wanted, I felt like God was really speaking to me about this dynamic of relationship with other people and with the divine. And so I started kind of digging. I have to admit, I thought this might be a really shallow area of research. I didn't think that there had been much gone into this idea of exploring psychologically and qualitatively, this research with how people relate to God, but I was really wrong. And this well is deep and wide. And so I have to admit tonight that I am not near an expert, but I'm really interested in this topic. And the things that I've learned over the past year and a half, I tried to mash it into this 1 hour presentation, and it's really made a difference in how I conceptualize clients that come into my office with the attachment theory lens, and also how those attachments seem to play out when they relate to God and the sacred. So that's where I'm coming from in this presentation. And I want to start off a little bit with defining spirituality. When a year and a half ago, I was really having a hard time nailing down a conceptualization of what spirituality is. And I realize a lot of people here have probably conceptualized their own perceptions of spirituality. But from the research that I was looking at, these two definitions, this one on the screen and the one on the next screen, has really helped me in orienting me on the road to conceptualizing the idea of spirituality. Pargament, in his book in 1999, he defined spirituality as this search for the sacred. And this sacred could be a thing, a place, an idea. He really defines spirituality too as this boundlessness and transcendence, and how people search for those experiences of a spiritual nature. So that was the first one I encountered. The second one, right here from Schultz and Sandage, sparked this idea within me about relating. This maybe this attachment component that we should consider when dealing with clients and their relationship with God. And so they defined spirituality as the ways that people relate to God, the ways that people relate to that which they hold sacred. So I do want to open this up a little bit. I'm looking for 2 or 3 responses. What makes drawing close to God difficult for maybe your clients? Just to give us some context to why this is an important topic. Feel free to unmute while you speak, and don't forget to mute when you're done.
To me, drawing close to God can be difficult because people have different conceptualizations of God's nature. And is God safe? Is God loving? Or is God harsh and capricious? So that makes it challenging given their lived experiences.
So their image of God it can be very different, and that might make it difficult for them to relate. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to suggest that some of the things that prohibit us from drawing close to God, or we find it difficult in drawing close to God, is noise and hurry and crowds and distractions. And they can, there are all kinds of images and different things that distract us, but distractions.
Yeah, the noise of life keeps us out of those moments of mindfulness and meditation. I think those moments really give us an opportunity to draw close to God. And yeah, I think you're definitely right. The busyness and noise of life takes away those opportunities. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Let's do one more.
I think a lot of times what I'm hearing in my office is that there are people who have they hear a harsh, critical voice from God, And they also, I think they really question whether it's possible sometimes.
Oh, so maybe it's that perception of um, God is being harsh. They perceive that they're hearing that from God, and maybe God doesn't like them very much. I think that's something that I've been hearing too, with my clients. Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Yeah, there's just a lot of variables, as you know, that interfere with that drawing close to God, whether it be noise or um, our perception that God doesn't like us, or maybe our perception that God is distant or punishing. So I think the next step in my logic here is to start at the base of attachment theory. As I developed this presentation, I realized I needed more and more and more foundation for this attachment theory piece. So it turned it into a larger portion of this presentation than I had intended, but I think it will really be useful. So the development of attachment theory stems from these three researchers, beginning with Harry Harlow in the 1950s and 60s. He's really known for his study with monkeys. And what he would do is he would, in this cage, he would have a wire monkey that had a milk bottle that provided food to this infant monkey. And also in the same cage, there would be beside that wire monkey a soft monkey, one that had a nice soft felt to it. And they observed this monkey in this cage, and it would spend a lot of time with the wire monkey eating and consuming its food. But then they added a stressor to the monkey's environment. This really kind of scary looking metal contraption that banged and clanged and made loud noises to scare this monkey. And the monkey, they observed, did not return to the wire monkey that provided food. It sought comfort with the other monkey. This monkey that was covered in soft fur, and it sought comfort and proximity to that soft fake mother. And Harry Harlow concluded that when faced with stress, we seek proximity to comfort. And that was really the key that Harry Harlow unlocked in this progression of attachment, that contact is absolutely necessary. Well, contact is key for comfort. Next is John Bowlby, and a lot of his research spanned from the 60s into the late 80s. And he really formulated and solidified this idea of relational attachment. He perpetuated and uncovered this idea that individuals develop a pattern of attaching that endures through a person's lifetime. That two individuals will attach together, and this pattern of attaching is perpetuated throughout the rest of this person's life. And he built off that basis that Harry Harlow solidified, that seeking proximity in contact with an attachment figure is necessary to be soothed and learn how to regulate. And then Mary Ainsworth. Mary Ainsworth built upon Harry Harlow and John Bowlby, and one of the famous, I think the famous study that Mary Ainsworth conducted was called the Strange Situation. And this experiment, they had this room filled with toys, and they had an attachment figure, a caregiver, a parent, bring their child, 12 to 18 months old, into this room. And the attachment figure would play with the child with these toys. And after a little while, the caregiver would leave the room, and then would enter a stranger. The stranger came in, and they observed how the child reacted when the stranger was in there. And then the stranger left, and the attachment figure came back into the room and tried to comfort their child. And what Mary Ainsworth really helped she really helped further this attachment theory field by identifying attachment patterns and labeling them. And so she discovered 4 different attachment styles that have developed over the last few years. And the 4 that she discovered was secure attachment. When the mother or the parent came back in and went to comfort their child, the comfort leaped into their arms and was able to be regulated by their mother's touch and presence. But there were 3 insecure attachment styles. The first was avoidant. When the parent came in, the child did not really know how to react when the parent came back. And it took a long time for that child to really interact with that parent or even show a positive reaction to that parent now being present. The second was ambivalent attachment. This child tended to be clingy. So when the parent originally left the room, they did not play with any of the toys because they were so anxious. And when the parent came back in the room, they wanted to be close to the parent to be comforted, but they were angry with the parent, and so they would get close and then push away. And there was this push and pull attachment style that Mary Ainsworth observed. And then the final attachment style she labeled as disorganized. This is where the child would either freeze up or run around the room. It seemed sporadic and erratic. And then when the caregiver came into the room, they would run to the corner to get away from the attachment figure. Mary Ainsworth noted that the disorganized style was typical of children who had experienced abuse. But this is where the identified patterns of attachment began, was with Mary Ainsworth. And so this is the foundational concept of how attachment theory came to be. But there are some really important principles in conceptualizing how attachment is involved in our life. So principle number 1, let's see if I can move this little Zoom bar. So principle number 1, attachment theory is a biologically based theory. And the big components of it are seeking proximity to a caregiver when the individual feels threatened. And this proximity is important for safety and survival. So that's where it really gets down to this biological component. And the early theorists and theorists today would say it's evolutionary. Click here. Yeah, there we go. The second principle is the idea that we have an attachment system, an attachment framework from which we interact with people, and it coexists with other systems that we use in situations like our behavioral systems. And if we're in a caregiving role, how we care for our children or for the children in our life, and the sexuality system and the exploration system. So attachment system is another one of those systems that coexist with those right there. Let's see, and the attachment behavior system is mainly about threat activation. So when we feel threatened, we want to seek proximity to our attachment figure. Number 3, the principle of attachment theory is the connection between how a child develops their attachment patterns and how their attachment figure has a caregiving pattern, and how those fit together and mold the child's attachment style. This theory for parents can be a little bit intimidating. When I talk with parents and couples in my practice, they're worried, oh, I'm gonna mess my kid up if I don't do perfectly right. This fact is not on the slide here, but the research shows that we want to be right in our attachment and caregiving style with our kids 70% of the time. 70%, a C average, it's good enough. And if you can do the right thing 70% of the time, your kids will most likely develop a secure attachment. But we know from this research of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth that these patterns of attachment are really formed in the infant stage of development. If there's early inconsistent caregiving or experiences of rejection or absent caregiving, those things shape how this child may attach to people the rest of their life. At least this is the model that will be their default. The fourth principle here says that there are three main functions of an attachment relationship. So back to this proximity seeking behavior from the child, but the attachment figure has two roles to play. They look for solidifying their role as a safe haven for their child, where their child can come to them, they can be comforted and feel safe and reassured and protected. And so that's what the child is seeking from the attachment figure. And if that attachment figure can develop this idea of this environment and relationship of being a safe haven, then they can be a secure base from which the children can leave the attachment figure and explore their world and feel safe to explore. My little 1-year-old, I can't help but think of little Everest right now, and he's about 15 months, and he's exploring these new places. We go to church and we go to the new playroom, and there's lots of big playhouses and Legos in the corner that we don't have at our house. And I set him down in the room, and he's a little bit hesitant. And I reassure him, and I give him a hug, and I point at the cool things in the room, and he takes a few steps away from me and looks back to see if I'm still there and watching. And I nod my head, and I usher him on to go play with the Legos, and he goes over to the Lego box and turns around to look at me, and I'm still watching. This is that secure base that we hope to develop that we hope parents develop with their children, so that the child feels comfortable enough to go explore. But until that gets solidified, there will always be this checking to make sure that, okay, you're not too far away. You're right here, and you'll be here when I need you. So the attachment figure who can create an environment of relationship that is a safe haven for their child, that then functions as a secure base, will help their children with emotional self-regulation. What they learn from being regulated by their parents' touch and comfort, they learn those skills to help regulate their emotions on their own when necessary. Principle number 5, attachment figures and types of attachment to them shape internal working models of the self and others. So maybe I'm getting ahead of my slides here because I've already talked about this. But those patterns of attachment that children learn early in their development become what the research calls internal working models. It becomes their internal working model. This is the schema that I have to interpret relationships the rest of my life. So if I had a parent that was unreliable, inconsistent with their presence, with their love, with their affection, with their protection, then the relationships I engage in up and through my adulthood, I may have a tendency to perceive that all people are inconsistent and unreliable and won't be there to meet my emotional or physical needs. So attachment figures help mold and shape that internal working model with their children. Principle number 6 is that the attachment system is relevant from cradle to the grave. So yeah, just to really iterate that this model does not just stick to a person in their childhood, it does extend through the rest of their life. Attachment there was a new concept I had uncovered, I had discovered in the research last week that I didn't know exactly how to put in here. But what I think is really cool and that we might be able to consider later in the presentation is the idea that in our childhood, we develop our default attachment style. But there are some people who developed an insecure attachment with their attachment figures in childhood. And when sometime in their adulthood development have been able to develop secure attachments with other people. And that paradigm shift that people can make to secure attachment is called earned attachment. I don't know a whole lot about it. I'm just going to throw that out there if it piques your interest. But I'm definitely going to look into that more. I think that's really going to help us conceptualize attachment to God. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. So principle number 7 is attachment security is an inner resource that can facilitate resilience. If a person can develop that secure attachment style with their figures and with their other relationships, the research shows that they are more resilient, that they have more fortitude, that they're able to regulate themselves when things don't go the way they're supposed to. But on the other side of that coin, attachment insecurity really leaves a person vulnerable to lots of different kinds of hurt and lead to poor outcomes in psychological well-being, holistic well-being. Principle number 8 here, there's 9 principles, so we're almost done with the principles. Principle number 8 is individuals have specific reactions when they are separated from or lose their attachment figures. This principle came, what was really supported by the work of John Bowlby. He's got 3 seminal volumes of attachment and loss and grief, and how attachment plays into the grief response of people. And he identified 3 different principles. He called them stages of grief. I'm just going to call them experiences of grief because he called them stages, and then later he was like, well, it's not linear, and like everybody experiences them in different ways, and so I'll just call them experiences of grief. So sometime if someone loses an attachment figure, there is this experience of protest. Like, this is not what I want, and I want them back, and then despair when they know it's irreversible. And then this work towards detachment. This isn't like unhealthy detachment. It's not like, well, I'm just going to forget about this person, but learning what things I can let go of because I need to. And so I think modern research in grief recovery helps define that balance between what to detach from and what to cling to. Okay, the final principle right here. I know I'm probably getting tired of these principles. Number 9, the attachment system, although it's universal across cultures and nationalities, it is culturally dependent. So how attachments play out are different among cultural values and specific norms to those cultures. So how people adapt to the loss of attachment figures, or how people develop these earned attachments from insecure attachments, are all informed and adjusted by a person's cultural perceptions and norms. Okay, there's the principles. Now a little bit of a practical model to kind of conceptualize, what are we talking about here? How do we know what attachment style a person might or might not fall into? What might be their default? So I really like this model from 1994, Griffin and Bartholomew. There might be a newer model. I haven't discovered it yet. I've spent a lot of time in like the foundational piece, getting myself prepared for my dissertation. But this one has really resonated with me. And this is a spectrum of attachment. So you're not going to end up in one camp firmly planted, I'm perfectly secure, or I'm fearfully avoidant. There's going to be some ebbs and flows on where you fall or where your clients fall in this model. So one of the things, the two things I really valued about Griffin and Bartholomew's model here of attachment styles is that the x-axis of this model really focuses on your self-perception. Is it positive? Is it negative? And then the y-axis is how you perceive others. And in the little text underneath all four of those descriptions, the x-axis is anxiety and the y-axis is avoidance. So to conceptualize secure attachment, if you have a positive view of yourself, you think that you are inherently good. You're not perfect, but you're able to live your life with the positives of your personality and also the negatives and integrate those things. And you also perceive that other people are generally good and reliable and worthy of love and trust. Then you're going to tend to be in this secure attachment category. You're going to tend to develop secure attachments because although you're comfortable with who you are, you're also able to take other people at who they are as well and relate to them in a healthy way. Let's say your perception of other people stay that way. They stay positive, but let's slide you to the other end of the x-axis here. You have a negative view of yourself, low self-esteem. I don't know if I'm worthy of love. I might consider myself worthless, but you really value other people. And so you want these intimate relationships, but a lot of times you feel like you're responsible for carrying the burden of making this relationship work. I kind of think of a teenager who they're dating somebody new and they're constantly texting each other like, hey, what are you doing? Where are you at? I have to have my phone at all times so I can text them and respond to them, because if they text me and I don't respond back, then our relationship might be over. And so there's this constant worry and preoccupation about, I have to be present to make this work and it's all on me. I'm obviously speaking in extremes, but that's kind of the essence of this anxious preoccupied category. But then if you move down, you cross that x-axis into the fearful avoidant category. A fearful avoidant attachment tends to have high anxiety and also high avoidance, because you think yourself as worthless and not very good or worthy of love, but you also don't see other people as reliable, and you might feel vulnerable that they might reject you and they're not consistent. And so you want closeness, but it's so scary that you might not be good enough and your needs might not be met that you just avoid relationships altogether, for the most part, because you're so fearful of the hurt that might come. And then the fourth category is dismissive avoidant. There's also high avoidance in this category, but there's low anxiety. So a person who is in this category tends to be very comfortable with themselves and who they are and their self-worth. But they also don't see much value in intimate relationships. Those relationships aren't for me. I'm okay by myself. I've got 2 friends. I don't need any more friends. This, just kind of dismissive of relationships with other people, generally speaking. So low anxiety and high avoidance. And this is kind of I think this was near the beginning of having this 4-quadrant model of attachment styles and having a spectrum that people can move through and see, where we might, where this person might be. But to kind of update the terminology from Griffin and Bartholomew's quadrants on the left here, on the right, the more current terminology for attachments that I've come across lately are these, and they coincide with Griffin and Bartholomew's quadrants. So secure means the same thing in 94. That was supposed to be 1994. That's a mistake. As it does today. The anxious category is now coupled with that Mary Ainsworth term of ambivalent, that push and pull. If you don't meet my need this time, then I want to seek proximity to you, but I'm angry that you left me. And so there's this like really push and pull, ambivalent, anxious relationship. The dismissive category that we just looked at is still considered dismissive. That's a pretty solid term right there. But I was reading a book that labeled this one shutdown attachment. And the shutdown attachment term really highlights the behavior that a person who has dismissive avoidant attachment styles exhibit. And it's this pressure of pushing your emotions down because I don't know how to deal with them, and I don't know what's going to happen if I really feel my emotions. So I'm just going to dismiss them and push them down. It's not great when you have a person with dismissive attachment and a person with anxious attachment. The person with anxious attachment is like, I need to get close to you and I need to express my emotions to you. And the dismissive person is like, nope, I don't want to do this. And so the anxious person goes, well, I don't know if you're hearing me. I'm going to be louder. I'm going to be more emotional. And the dismissive person just shuts down even more and tries to shut you down. And so you can kind of see how these interact with each other. But then that last category there coincides with the fearful category from the previous slide. The term that Mary Ainsworth used was disorganized. Not really knowing how to be. I'm confused about myself. I'm confused about other people. I don't think I'm a very worthy person, and I can't really rely on anybody else. And so my whole life is just disorganized. And like I said with Mary Ainsworth, these people tend to have some abuse history, where they may have come to the conclusion that they're bad. And if their attachment figure was the abuser, that people I need to attach to might hurt me. And there's a lot of shame. And so the more current term I hear about this one is this shame-filled attachment. Really preys on motivating themselves on shame. I have to be bad. Yes. So I'm going to read a little bit, an excerpt from each of these categories to help conceptualize what each particular attachment style looks like in a family relationship, and begin to apply it to how it might look like when we attach to God. So what we've all been waiting for, how does this apply to attachment to God? At least I hope it begins the discussion. Oh, well, before we get to that, like Ryan said at the beginning, our perceptions of God or our God image uh, explains or helps influence how we attach to the divine. Exline and her colleagues in 2013, and their colleagues in 2013, identified 3 God images from their God 10 scale. And people fell into these 3 perceptions that they either believed that God was cruel, that God was distant, or that God was loving. Loving was like a precursor to attachment, a secure attachment to God, but cruel and distant predicted anxious and avoidant attachments with God. And I think that's important to consider when we think about how our clients and their religiousness and conception of spirituality influence their perception of who God is, and then it plays out in their attachment styles. So I need to move that. I'll just move it when I speak. So anxious attachment to God. These excerpts come from a book that I've been reading called Attached to God by Crispin Mayfield. He's a pastor and a professional counselor in Oregon, and he mainly focuses on couples therapy and specifically emotion-focused therapy and attachment styles with couples. And he applied these concepts to God, and I just really valued some of his words in here. So this helped me conceptualize it, and I hope it'll be beneficial to you. So anxious attachment to God. In healthy families, children trust their parents will respond and rescue them from disconnection, at least most of the time. But if you grew up in a family where it was more likely that your cry would be ignored than responded to, you were unsure if you'd be rescued or if you'd feel abandoned to the utter hopelessness of isolation, it's scary to be alone in a world where no one comes to save you from the painful feeling of disconnection. So you created a pattern of frantically calling out for help and eventually focused all your energy on preventing disconnection from ever happening in the first place. Anxious attachment is a pattern of worriedly seeking closeness with God, fearing that the moment we relax, we will backslide into separation. We are convinced it's entirely up to us to maintain closeness with God, which means we can never actually rest with God. It's up to you to stay close to God through prioritizing time in prayer, regular church attendance, or scheduled Bible reading. So how this anxious attachment to God seems to play out is this over spiritualization, this over religiousness. You miss a Sunday at church and you're constantly worried that God is angry with you. And so you make up for it by praying 5 times a day and reading your Bible every day and also doing a devotional in the evening. And these behaviors are not something that you're doing out of this full cup of joy and satisfaction. You're doing it in an anxious way, trying to desperately cling to this God. And I heard it said recently that an anxious attachment to God looks like a person saying, I know God loves me, but God doesn't like me. And that being some of the essence of this attachment experience. This overworking, trying to stay close to their God. Shut down attachment, right here. This dismissive, avoidant, shut down, push your emotions down attachment. Here's a little excerpt from that. Shut down attachment is a pattern of trying to stuff down our negative emotions to get close to God. It is based on the presumption that emotions such as fear, sadness, pain, and doubt are incompatible with the life of faith. So we try as hard as we can not to feel these things, often using religious language saying, God is in control, so why should I worry? Shutting down uncomfortable feelings seems like the path to becoming a person who truly trusts God. Our relationship with God can never be the refuge we need because we can't risk crawling into the lap of a God who will find worry to be offensive. We can't take the chance of sharing our pain or doubt or fear, lest it lead to terrifying disconnection. So we squash our feelings, hoping that it will keep God close. But over time, without the ability to go to God with our stress, feeling authentically connected spiritually to God and others becomes increasingly difficult. Our practice of shutdown attachment leaves us starved for the true connection we need. This conceptualization of dismissive attachment reminds me a lot of Brené Brown's research on vulnerability, and that when we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable in relationship, then we don't open ourselves up to connection. So that's what I'm reminded here with this shutdown attachment style. Let's go to shame-filled. Okay, yeah, shame-filled attachment. Shame-filled attachment to God. Shame-filled attachment believes that the best way to get close to God is to shame and blame ourselves for falling below the standard of perfection. We tell ourselves that if we could just be a little better, we could get close, but we can never transform quite enough. So if we can't become adequately holy, we can at least punish ourselves for not being good enough. We end up trying to get close by proving to God that we know how bad and unlovable we are. In childhood, if we receive mixed messages about our parents' feelings toward us, we can't trust that they want closeness. One day they seem to love us, the next they seem annoyed with or outright hostile toward us. In the worst situations, we live with the threat of abuse and violence, even on the days when our parents tell us how much they adore us. In adulthood, this attachment style makes relationships difficult to navigate. We desperately want closeness. We make our desire for connection clear to others until our shame catches up with us. And then we shut down and push others away, fearing they will see us for who we really are. We feel all alone in the world, yet terrified to let anyone close. The shame-filled attachment style looks a lot like if I can't connect with God through the goodness of who I am, if my goodness is not good enough for God to accept me and attach to me, then I'll just come alongside God and hate the parts that he hates about me. And so we have this, this person will have this punishing view of themselves, not just low self-esteem, but like tearing down their self-esteem, tearing down their value and worth, because they perceive that being the only way that we can have something in common with this God that I desperately need to attach to. But that's not the God we see in the Bible. These insecure attachments that people have with the God of the Bible isn't what we see when we read about how Jesus conceptualizes this Father, this divine caregiver, this divine attachment figure for all humanity. And I think it's best exhibited in the prodigal son parable that Jesus iterates. We'll come back to that. And that. Yeah, let's get to this. I like this here. So you know the story. I don't have to read the prodigal son here, but I do want to hit some high points, right? So there's two brothers. The younger brother says, "I want my inheritance," and the father doesn't seem to argue. He offers the inheritance to his son. The son takes it and he squanders it, and you can let your imagine wander where it may about what he did with that money. But he ended up finding himself in need. He has a need now, just like those children from the early experiments with Ainsworth and Bowlby. This son has a need that needs to be met, and he's looking for it somewhere, and he can't seem to find it. And he finds himself needing a job, and so he takes a job as a hired hand for to feed pigs, an unclean thing for a Jewish citizen to do. And then he feels that threat, right? That hunger in his belly. You know, he's hungry. He's not able to provide for himself, and his life, his existence, something about him is threatened, and he has this proximity-seeking behavior. And so he goes to seek proximity with his attachment figure. And he knows, like, you know, I don't know if my dad is going to accept me back as I am. I may have to serve in his house as a servant, but I know, I don't know if it says this specifically, but he's like, I know my dad will take me back. Whether it be as a son or a servant, my dad will take me back. And so in a way, the son's perception of his attachment figure, his father, is somewhat of a safe haven. His father has proven to be a safe haven. If you need something, you can come home. I will be here. And the father is, and he's waiting. He's been waiting for his son. And so his son comes home, and the father doesn't expect him to answer for his actions. He doesn't expect him to get clean. I don't even know if this son thought to try and clean himself up. He may still be dirty. I don't know. But he shows up, and the father embraces him without conditions, to welcome him back into his home with emotional love, celebration, and support back into this relationship. And so what we really see from this story of the prodigal son is that the father is this perfect attachment figure that is trying to develop secure attachments with his children. The father's door is always open. The son knows his needs will be met by the father and sought proximity with the father. And since the father consistently meets the needs of his son felt comfortable enough to step away from his attachment figure and explore the world. So you can see that the father was a secure base for the child, for his son. And so that allowed the son to explore the world, even allowing his son to make his terrible decisions. Those decisions were on the son, but his father was still there with his arms open when the son returned. The father didn't lecture him, make him feel bad. The father didn't hold to any hard and fast conditions, but accepted the son back as he was. And I think that really exhibits this secure attachment and caregiving style that we hope that parents make with their children, but what I think God is really trying to do with his people. So back a couple of slides. The attachment to God inventory. This was a scale created at Abilene Christian University by Beck and McDonald in 2004, that piggybacked on the previous research on attachment theory and attachment to this conceptualization of attaching to God. And this inventory only measures two things. It measures a person's avoidance of attachment to God and their anxiety with attachment to God. So if you score low in all the categories, then you're most likely to have a secure attachment with God. But those are the two categories that the attachment to God inventory measures. There may be a newer attachment scale out. I have yet to find it. I'm hoping there's a new one out so I can use it for my dissertation. But this one only sticks to two categories. And I think areas for further research might be to expand an attachment to God scale or inventory to incorporate all four categories. I think that would really be helpful to the field. And just a couple of examples from the attachment to God inventory that is, by the way, widely used even up to last year. I've been pulling other people's dissertations and theses from across the country that are doing research on attachment to God, and they're still using this one right here. It has good to acceptable reliability. So maybe in the future we can hope to bolster this or have one that has excellent reliability. So hoping that maybe research will lead in that direction. But from this attachment to God inventory, one of the items that measures the avoidance is I prefer not to depend too much on God. This idea that I need to take care of my problems myself. This goes back to a whole nother conceptualization of spiritual coping skills. And the healthy way of spiritual coping is collaboration, where I take responsibility for the things that are happening in my life, but I also rely on God and his power and his divine intervention in my life as well. And that collaboration seems to be the most holistic, coping strategy if we're talking about spiritual coping strategies. But doing it all yourself is not helpful. It leads to worse mental health and holistic health outcomes, and the same with anxiety. The example in this inventory is I get upset when I feel God helps others but forgets about me. And so a person who might have this anxious view of attachment to God may throw their hands up and say, well, I have no control over how to fix these things in my life, so I'm just going to leave it to God and just let him deal with it because I just can't deal with it. And the research has shown that is not as helpful as a spiritual coping strategy either. So we really look for this collaboration style, but that collaboration style really exhibits a secure attachment where God is a secure base and a safe haven for us to explore and be able to collaborate and have that autonomy and interconnectedness with our God. So that's the attachment to God inventory. And I want to kind of conclude my presentation a little bit, and maybe we might have time for a question or two. I'll try to answer them if I can. Maybe some of y'all can help me out too, but I want to end with a quote from Jeffrey Kotler in his book on being a therapist, because I think it really highlights our unique honor of being a pastoral counselor with our clients who are speaking holistic wellness, including spiritual attachment problems as well. And so I just want to read this little excerpt that really touched me when I read his book. Traditionally, the therapist has been seen as the contemporary equivalent of the oracle perched on a mountaintop. Clients are the pilgrims who journey in search of enlightenment. Mistrusting their own inner voices and lacking self-direction, clients have looked to gurus for guidance and see them as embodiments of power. There are ancient traditions in almost every human culture of not only worshiping gods, but also showing reverence to those who are considered conduits to the spirit world and to those who are considered sages, shamans, or healers. And I think we find ourselves in a similar boat as conduits to the spiritual world. And a lot of times our clients have these insecure attachments, mistrusting their own inner voice and looking for us to help them find ways to heal those attachment injuries and wounds. So that's what I'll leave with you. I've got 2 minutes left before we take our break, but I'm happy to field a question or two, or just tell you how much I don't know about this subject. So thank you all for being so great.
Mason, I see that there was a question posed on chat for you, for everybody.
Okay.
Check that Chris posed there.
I have not read that book, Chris. Birth of the Living God. I need to write that down, or I'm gonna take a picture of it. That'll probably work better. Which reminds me, I do have the reference list of all of these. There's the references, but then here's also some recommended readings that have been recommended to me. I haven't got into them yet, but that's on my list to do in this next year. So if you're interested more about attachment, look into these. I know Dan Siegel does more neuroscience about attachment and what happens in the brain. So yeah. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, Julie Exline was the keynote at Canuga in October. Man, I wish I would have gone. Oh, thank you. References, yes, absolutely. Here are the references again that I used in the presentation. Happy to do that. Yes.
In the psychodynamic theory, there's this element about attachment that appears in the transference with the person. And there are, some of us would say that there's a redemptive component to a person experiencing, not only experiencing the transference, but also working through it. And that there's a sense in which do not we all worship other gods? And is there a God that somehow that is identified in certain theologies by being perfection, ideal? But seems to me the redemptive process itself is part of what the discovery of God may be about. The sense of in some of the more modern dynamic theories, is it Daniel Stern has written about infant development, and the non-Oedipal theories, the ones that are more primitive than Oedipal, diagnostic categories are sources of what someone, in other words, someone treats the therapist like they treat other authority figures in their lives.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if the transference that we experience in the room, if we are now experiencing their attachment pattern, and maybe sometimes their attachment wounds. And I don't know, maybe that's why the therapeutic alliance is so important, because maybe we become a surrogate attachment figure in their life where they learn how to attach to people in a secure way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think part of the healing part of the process is allowing for the client to um, make those bonds with us, and for us to create a healing process in the therapy relationship. And so the content of our conversation is not always as important as the relationship in which that conversation occurs.
Hey, y'all, this is awesome, and we could go a lot longer tonight, but I know we need to watch the clock. Mason, thank you so very much. That was exceptional. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that.
I appreciate your work. That's much more to think about. I do have just one announcement to make. Our secretary for TNAPT, Carolyn Goings, reminded me to please remind you that if you need a CE certificate, please in the chat, and again, it's Carolyn Goings, Carolyn Smith Goings. If you could direct message her and give your name the way you want it on your certificate, and then also your email address where she may send that certificate. So if you could do those two things, again, Carolyn will appreciate that. Let us take at this time about a 5-minute break. We're running just a little bit behind, but we might need a little break, and we'll come back to Dr. Ribeiro in just a moment. Let's take 5.